So much for joining us this morning for our panel event entitled Becoming a B Corp, Scaling with Purpose. For those of you who've not met me, I'm Helen Lucas. I'm a partner in Igniton Law, and I shall be hosting this morning's event. So the objective behind this morning's panel event is very much to explore the role of B Corps in driving social and environmental change, discussing their impact, challenges, and opportunities for the future. I'm delighted to be joined this morning by industry pioneers from Who Gives a Crap, Seismic, Enso Tyres and Capsule Insurance as they share their personal experiences and challenges in achieving B Corp status. They will hopefully help to demystify the B Corp journey, exploring the importance of the pursuit of B Corp certification and a commitment to making a longer-term positive impact. So hopefully you'll have seen, but this morning's format will take place as a panel of experts participating in a platform-style discussion. So we're going to follow that up with a Q&A, where hopefully you'll find all the answers to any questions that might pop up as we go along. So do feel free to pop your questions into the chat, and we'll sort of go through them as we go along and answer as many as we possibly can at the end. So just very, very briefly, before I hand over to the real experts, just a very brief introduction to Igniton Law and our B Corp journey. As many of you know, Igniton was originally founded to help entrepreneurs, startups, scale-ups and SMEs with their legal needs. And over the years, we've become gradually more and more aware that our client base, a lot of them either are B Corp certified or having a real social environmental purpose to their business. And increasingly, we notice new joiners and clients quizzing us about our social responsibility and environmental credentials. So having already worked closely with Seismic and other clients, and personally having a huge passion for environmental issues, it wasn't long before we embarked on our B Corp journey. So from the outset, for those of us who know us, we're a bit different to a traditional law firm, and we've kind of been more able to be committed to the exercise of discretion in terms of who we want to work for. So our client base was already really widespread in this area. In terms of the process itself, I'll let our guests talk in more detail, but I know from having gone through it, obviously we went through the very, very extensive rounds of questions at the beginning, and then our ops team have heroically implemented all the changes required to our business. So we're very much hoping and expecting to achieve our B Corp status in the next few weeks. So before we start our discussion, I'll just give a very brief introduction to each of our panelists. I'm sure they'll want to introduce themselves as well. So firstly, we've got Bernie, the head of sustainability from Who Gives a Crap. Certainly a very popular brand in my household. I'm sure the same for many of you. Who Gives a Crap is one of the fastest growing e-commerce businesses in Australia and now the US and UK too. More than that, they're one of the country's fastest growing social businesses, and they make beautiful products which are very popular in my household. Amy from Seismic, she's their co-founder and chief impact officer. Seismic, for those of you who don't know them, are an absolutely brilliant international team of sustainability advisors, driving lasting environmental and social change. Seismic help companies leverage their B Corp framework to understand, improve, measure and communicate their impact. And as well as Igniton Law, they've got some fantastic clients, including Patagonia, Innocent Drinks, Piper Private Equity and WD-40, to name just a few. James Goodwin from Enso Tyres. Enso are a clean tech automotive SME based in London, and they have the unique distinction of being the first tyre company to achieve B Corp certified status. And finally, Victoria McDonnell, Marketing Director from Capsule Insurance. Capsule are a specialist insurance provider that helps some of the UK's top scale-ups navigate the risks of rapid expansion. So, moving quickly on to our main event, the panel discussion. We're going to cover a whole series of topics this morning, starting with what is a B Corp and the B Corp certification process, moving on to personal journeys in B Corp, why B Corp, pros and cons of B Corp, opportunities for B Corps in the B Corp community, and finally, post-certification points. So hopefully, once we've been through all of this, you'll have most of your questions answered. But as I say, anything else, pop it in the chat and we'll do our best to deal with it at the end. So moving on to the start, if I hand over initially to Amy, to give us a bit of a run through what is B Corp and the B Corp certification process. Thank you, Amy.
Great pleasure. Thanks, Helen. And lovely to be here speaking with you all. And yeah, I'm Amy from Seismic, as is mentioned, and I've kind of dedicated my career to helping to grow the B Corp movement. I'm a big believer in it, and our team is as well, as kind of the best framework out there to help companies to go on their impact journeys, because it can be really daunting to know where to start. I think a lot of companies know we need to do something and we want to do something, but where on earth do we begin? And so one of the great things about B Corp is that it provides this amazing framework to help organizations to understand what to measure, what questions to ask themselves, and what they can start to work on improving. So really love it for that. And that framework is called the B Impact Assessment. So that's been designed by B Lab. So B Lab are the organization that run the B Corp movement. And they have a standards team who designs the framework, the assessment. And that assessment is a free online tool. So if you don't already have an account on it, I highly recommend going and creating an account straight after this. It's bimpactassessment.net, I think is the website. I'm sure it can be shared around after. But yeah, it's a tool basically that almost 280,000 companies around the world are using to measure their impact. So even if you're not sure if certification is exactly right for you or right for you yet, you can just start using the tool to start reflecting on your performance. As well as that, we kind of like to describe B Corp as three things. It's that framework, that management tool that I mentioned. It's then a certification for companies who do choose to meet that higher standard of performance. And not only they want to meet it, but they want to verify it and prove it to their stakeholders and hold themselves to account as well, to kind of keep on maintain and improve on that performance. And as well as a certification, it is a movement. The whole point of B Corp is that it exists to help people use business as a force for good, and essentially to change capitalism, really, to move it away from a purely kind of shareholder-driven view of capitalism, where we exist to drive profits only, to shifting that over to a stakeholder-driven view, where we say, yes, absolutely, we want to drive profit, and that's very important, but we want to do that while also considering people and planet alongside profit, which obviously is not only important for just having a basic responsibility to society and the environment, but what's great is that it also kind of helps usually to drive more profit anyway, so it's a win-win all around. But yeah, a little bit just quickly about how to certify. So the framework that I mentioned, the B Impact Assessment, it is built around 5 different pillars. So those are governance, workers, community, environment, and customers. And every question within the assessment is weighted with the score, and you need to earn a minimum score of 80 points in order to be eligible to certify. Now, most companies, when they first complete the assessment, the average score is 50 points. So most of the time, an organization will need to work on implementing some improvements internally before they are up at that 80 and above score. But once you are, you can submit your assessment, and then B Lab will verify your performance. They'll request a number of pieces of evidence. There'll be a discussion with a standards analyst, and then they'll verify your score. And if your score is still over 80 points, you become certified as a B Corp. Now, it's quite often that company scores drop during that time. 52% of companies who submit their assessments are not successful on their first attempt. So there's a lot of ways that you can accidentally slip up. But once you do get your score verified at over 80 points, then you're welcomed into the B Corp community. You pay an annual certification fee, which is a tiered fee structure based on your revenue. And then you just need to recertify every 3 years. And the other thing I'll mention, and then I'll stop talking, is there's also, as well as meeting that performance requirement of 80 points and higher, you also need to amend your articles of association So that is is where you get your shareholders to approve a commitment in your governing documents to say that you will consider all stakeholders when acting on behalf of the business and not just shareholders, and also that you'll create and share an annual impact report. So it's quite a lot of information I've just chucked at you, but there we go. That's something to start us off.
Thanks, Amy. That's really helpful. And it reminded me when you're talking about the Articles of Association, we actually have a note that we've done to kind of summarize those changes that need to be made. So we can share that afterwards if it's useful for anyone. So I think those are probably, unless any of the other panelists want to join on this one specifically, probably the thing to move on to then is talking about personal journeys in B Corp. And I think maybe James from Enso Tyres was going to start on this, and then we'll let the others come in as well.
That's very kind, Helen. Good morning. It's great to be here. Thank you very much indeed. My name is James. I'm a chief of staff for a small medium enterprise called Enso. We specialise in making better tyres for electric vehicles. The tyre industry is inherently dirty, but tyres are fundamental to our personal lives as well as our business lives. So it's a fascinating industry to be involved in. I was given responsibility to take the company through our certification process about 3 years ago. So I'm now looking forward to recertification later this year. I think the obvious pro for being a B Corp is the storytelling aspect, particularly when we are engaging our investors. But the process was rigorous. And Amy's already outlined the 5 criteria that we all have to report against. For me, that was a huge learning exercise because I was quite new into the business, and the business was really sequel. So it was the CEO, me, and our chief technical officer who was living in Germany. So really, all of that responsibility fell onto my desk. So it turned into a huge fact-finding mission to be able to answer off all the criteria. And it wasn't just answering the criteria first up. There were a couple more rounds of follow-on questions, which the B Corp team wanted us to verify. And I think that's something worth bearing in mind, that when you go through what is an extensive question set, just be prepared for the second order questions that will tease out a bit more detail. That being said, it was a great exercise to go through because it really made me inculcate myself into the fabric of what Enso was back then and what it's turning into now. Yeah, I've already alluded to the investor storytelling. That has had an important impact for us. The company is not just a B Corp, but we've also been nominated, or rather shortlisted as an Earthshot finalist last year. So both those things have been quite powerful for us in our fundraising journey.
Thanks, James. I think, Bernie, you were going to talk a bit about your experience as well, and in terms of your personal journey at Who Gives a Crap.
Yeah, thank you, Helen. I'm Bernie. I am Director of Sustainability at Who Gives a Crap. I'm going to let a little secret out here. I haven't actually been involved in a B Corp certification yet, but we are certainly a B Corp certified company. I will be involved in our recertification, which will be happening within the next 12 months. So I had a chat with our founders about why we became a B Corp and our journey towards it. And early on in the business's life, our founders talked with some of the B Corp team, and we found that we were really aligned. And the initial decision was, we don't need to become a B Corp. We're already doing all the things that they're asking for anyway. However, they decided that after a few years that they did want to become a B Corp and support the movement. But what they found was that as they went through that certification, which took around about 18 months to do the very first one, that there was quite a few things within the business that B Corp certification pointed out that we didn't have. Some of the documentation, some of the processes and procedures that we should have had in place, or part of the governance documents, for example. And it really opened our eyes up to areas that we could be a better business, even though we were already striving to be a good business. So it's been really positive for us. And we truly do believe that the B Corp has enhanced our business and will for pretty much every other business out there, regardless of how they're already operating.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Bernie, because I'm very much the same. I mean, I was involved in all of our initial questions, and they were lengthy. I did tell the other panelists that I can remember a sort of fateful afternoon in my kitchen with children running around, and I had raging COVID and a husband who was isolating, and I had these kind of questions coming at me, which I had to answer. And then, as James said, you do them once and you think you're done, and then you get the next lot, and it's really a lot. But like you, once you've kind of done those questions, then really at that point I start to feel a bit of a fraud, because it's the ops team and the people on the ground who actually have to make all this stuff happen. And from our point of view, it's very much absolutely credit to them that we're hopefully going to achieve this status, rather than sort of myself and what the fellow partners at Ignition have done, I think. Are there any of the other panelists that would like to talk a bit about their personal experience?
I mean, I'm happy to jump in. I think, as I mentioned, I've been working on B Corp for a long time, but normally I've been advising companies. So I've spoken to maybe 500, 600 companies about their B Corp journeys. And so Seismic, we're just celebrating our 3rd birthday this month. And when we certified 2 years ago, it was a really different experience, because I was going through it for my own company. There's a small organization, and it's hard, right? Like, even with the best intentions, and obviously sustainability is our whole world, you're still a small organization who's trying to focus on surviving and just doing what you need to do and pleasing your clients, and and all of that. And actually it's hard to make sure you're enshrining these positive practices in from the start. So it was really interesting to kind of personally go through that process. I felt like I was, it was like an always the bridesmaid, never the bride kind of thing. It's like always the B Corp advisor, never the B Corp. And to actually go through it and learn was added an extra layer onto the whole experience. But I can definitely empathize with organizations who are spinning, all of those various different plates. But it really does kind of help. Having that certification and that commitment just helps to keep you on track, and it helps to make sure that it doesn't just slip onto the back burner. So I've been really grateful for it from that point of view as well.
Thank you, Amy. Without wishing to put too much onto you, I think the next thing we were sort of vaguely focusing on was why B Corp. And I know when we were talking last week, you had some really interesting kind of stats and things. I don't know if you've got any of those to hand. You probably have them imprinted on your brain, but sort of stats about how B Corps were doing versus other companies and things like that. I think maybe you might have some interesting things to share on that.
Sure, yeah, happy to. And I enjoy the stat side of things, because there's like a feeling and a warmth and a lovely kind of benefit of being part of the community, which is not kind of non-tangible, and there's this amazing collaboration and etc. But then, and that appeals to some people, and it truly is pretty amazing. But then also you want to know, okay, but what are the hard stats? What are the facts here behind, like, why it's good to be a B Corp? So apart from that, kind of becoming a part of this amazing community and this framework that helps you stay on track to your performance, there's a number of kind of more measurable benefits. I think first of which being recruitment. So obviously, as everybody knows, there's the kind of millennials and Gen Zs want to work for purpose-driven organizations. And it's really interesting, actually. We were on a panel last night with Jamie Oliver Group, and they were saying that their maybe, let's say, kind of middle-aged audience say, oh, it would be nice if a company, we would prefer you to be a purposeful business or certified or whatever, but actually the younger audience, the kind of teens to 20s audience are saying, we will not engage with you unless you are purpose driven, unless you are doing something good. So for recruiting that audience, it's incredibly important. And I think the stat is that 80% of candidates who applied to B Corps mentioned the fact that they're a B Corp in the interview process and want to work for them because of that. You've also got operations. It helps you to kind of get your house in order internally. So 74% of B Corps have a formal business plan in place versus 52% of UK SMEs. It just kind of forces you to formalize things and get your house in order, which is very important and beneficial just to the workings of your organization in general. I know that's been the case for us. Investors as well is a huge one. So 70% of B Corps who were seeking, and this was a couple of years ago, I reckon this number will have gone up. 70% of B Corps who were seeking equity finance secured all of their finance or more than, versus 56% of the wider SME population. We work with a lot of private equity firms who are seeking to either acquire B Corps or take their portfolio companies through the B Impact assessment and encourage them to certify. So that's a big one. Customers, 76% of customers think that businesses have a responsibility to people and planet. Resilience, 88% of research shows that ESG practices result in better operational performance and more resilient organizations. And I think all of this, what's nice is that all of this is kind of reflected in some growth stats. So there was a 26% growth rate for B Corps between 2017 and 2022, as compared to the national average of 5%. Especially when you take into consideration the fact that that includes, 2 years of pandemic and everything else that's going on in the world at that time. That 26% growth rate for B Corps is pretty impressive, and I think it says a lot.
That's fascinating, Amy. I love a statistic. It kind of brings it all to life, doesn't it? I think we'll probably move on because we haven't heard from Victoria yet, and I know you've got a lot of interesting things to share. I think we would probably be talking about the pros and cons of B Corp next, if you want to go on to that a little bit, Victoria.
Yeah, of course, Helen. Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Victoria McDonnell, Marketing Director at Capsule. We sort of provide insurance solutions to high growth, fast growth, VC-backed companies. We became B Corp certified a couple of years back and found ourselves fortunate to be working with lots of other B Corps ourselves, and we can call them clients. So yeah, I suppose for us, sort of becoming a B Corp was something that we set out to hopefully achieve from day one. Yeah, it's that independent certification element, I think, that's the appeal and the attraction. I suppose for us, it was a way of rubber stamping our commitment as a business to do the right thing, to sort of grow the business, in the right way. That conscious commitment, not just to, ourselves as a leadership team, but also to our staff, our clients, this kind of communities that we sort of find ourselves operating in as well, and who we choose to partner with, and so on and so forth. So yeah, I think when we get into the pros and cons of B Corp, they definitely I found myself sort of thinking about this coming into this session, and definitely sort of was drawn towards a lot more pros than cons. I think I'm going to tee the cons off first, because there wasn't a great deal for us. From sort of our experience, it was a long, drawn out, tough process. It's thorough. It's really thorough. And there's lots to do, and lots to sort of put in place and progress. but I wouldn't say they were real negatives particularly. I suppose it's hard work, but no more hard work than running your business the right way, and the business you would want to run the way you would want to run it anyway, properly. It's just that you've got sort of a process and sort of evidence and sort of to sort of go through to get to certification. So yeah, I think for me, the pros is sort of what I want to sort of really focus on here. And we could spend all day talking about the pros. I think for me it probably comes down to sort of three main areas. I think learning about yourself is a massive pro of going through this process and becoming a B Corp certified company. We learn so much about ourselves. It's a learning process. It's a journey. There's no way that we went into this sort of, the finished article, able to sort of just fly through this and sort of sit back and put our feet up. We were learning as we went through this about what we needed to put in place, what we didn't have in place, how we needed to evidence certain things, whether that was policies, sort of transparency on certain things, processes, our commitment to the environment, our commitment to our people. We were, going through this, with our eyes open, fully willing to sort of do whatever we needed to do to sort of evidence our commitment. But we definitely came out of it sort of more rounded, more knowledgeable, as a result. And it's an ongoing journey. It's something that doesn't stop with certification. It's about continual improvement. So I think, learning a lot about ourselves and gaining a huge amount of knowledge was definitely an advantage of this. I almost wanted to touch a little bit on growth, not as a dirty word, alongside sort of all of the things that we're committing to, but I think one of the pros of us being a B Corp, and it's definitely not something we set out thinking of or in the sort of forefront of our minds, but as a result of becoming B Corp certified, it's definitely allowed us as a business to attract other B Corps into sort of our sort of client base. And I think there's definitely a little bit of that that goes on. I think B Corps is definitely a community of like-minded businesses that sort of respect and understand maybe the journeys that each other's going through and what you represent. And I think as a result of that, what you want to do businesses with other B Corps. So we found that we've definitely sort of significantly grown the number of B Corps we work with as a result of being a B Corp ourselves. And I think because people understand where you're coming from and what you represent, and sort of are drawn to that. I think B Corps do gravitate towards each other. And I think the third one for me, before I sort of hand back, I'll let someone else pick up on this, would be, I think one of the pros of being a B Corp is it's really helped us to attract great people into our business. I think, we talk about the sort of Gen Zs being sort of seeking out B Corps as their next employer, as the sort of employer of choice. And I think we've definitely found that at Capsule as well, when we've sort of taken people through sort of interview process and sort of onboarding. It's definitely become apparent that they've aligned themselves with what we represent, what we're about, and what we can offer them ultimately, and that commitment to them to make Capsule a great place to work, a great place to grow and be themselves, and hopefully carve a career out at, is definitely one of the pros, I would say, outside as well.
That sounds wonderful, Victoria. I feel like maybe I need a second career and come and work for you guys.
You're welcome anytime, Helen. Come and join the Capsule Lights. Yeah.
I don't know, on the topic of pros and cons, I can add some things myself, but I don't know if Bernie or James have anything that you want to come in on that topic.
Yes, please. I'd love to back up something that Victoria's touched on, and I think it's the value of the community, the B Corp community. So I'll give you an example, and I think one of the reasons why I'm on this call is because of Capsule, and Victoria, thank you for leaning into this, but we were having significant issues with our insurance coverage and portfolio. It's a small company dealing in tyres, and tyres are inherently dirty. They're a fire risk, and consequently, when we were looking at platforms to launch the business, the costs that were coming back from some established names in the industry were prohibitively expensive, really, really expensive. We were introduced to Capsule because of the B Corp relationship, and consequently, I've managed to establish a business relationship with a couple of great executives, Victoria, at your end, who have been really competitive, very open and transparent about the insurance coverage that we actually need. So I think that is a really good example of how the community can help us out. But I think just going back to the certification again, and again, it's about community. There is a community of B leaders. So when anybody's going through their certification process, it can be bewildering. And I certainly needed some help. And I engaged a B leader on a day rate to help us overcome some uncertainties and answer some questions, one of which was really fundamental. And I think if we hadn't have done this at the start, we wouldn't have been certified. But if I just give you an example, we are in the industry of rubber and plastic products. However, when I started the BIA process, I had put ourselves into the manufacturing sector. We're not. And actually, the fundamental change in track from manufacturing to wholesale and retail meant that there was a shift in the question set. And that shift enabled us to answer the questions in the BIA with much greater certainty and much greater relevance. So what we had assumed was the right track was actually the wrong track. And I think that's something just to pay really careful attention to when you're going through the process of the BIA. And if you do need some help with it, ask B Corp if they can connect you to a B leader or somebody that is intimately involved in the process.
That's really interesting, James. Thank you. Bernie, I don't know if you have any sort of experiences of the pros and cons of B Corp before we move on a little bit.
I'd very much like to say it's pretty much everything Victoria already said. It's and James backed up there. The community is amazing. There are very few cons, apart from exactly what Victoria said and James there. It is a long process, and it's quite arduous, but there's a reason for that. It makes it difficult to become a B Corp, so not everyone can do it, right? Like you've joined a pretty exclusive group once you've become a B Corp, and you've really proved, and you've got that stamp of approval for other businesses and for your customers to trust you as an ethical business. And I think that's what helps to drive the growth, being a B Corp. One of the sourcing team came to me just a few weeks ago and said, I'm considering this new supplier. What questions should I ask them? And I sort of rattled off 10 questions. I said, I'll scrap all of that. Just ask them if they're a B Corp. If they are, you can tick all of those boxes and we'd be happy to deal with them. So, you know, it really does make it easy for us when we're looking at other businesses that we might want to deal with. And we know it does for other businesses that want to deal with us as well.
That's really interesting. Thank you. I mean, in terms of our experience, as I alluded to at the beginning, personally, I was heavily involved in the questions at the beginning, and they are extensive, and they for us as well, we didn't, a bit like James, it was kind of hard to fit directly into a category because, you know, B Corp talks a lot about stakeholders, and a lot of our team work remotely, so it was kind of even to the point of kind of establishing who the right people were that we should be asking questions of and taking into account. Even that initial step was quite tricky, and then as we've talked about, the question process is really extensive. But I think then the hard work of actually putting it all into place, which I can't claim any responsibility for, that follows, again, is a lot to do. That said, I think we've talked a lot about accountability, and I think once you're in that process, you can't let those little things slip. So the things that are important, the suppliers, the stuff that you have in the office and everything that perhaps wouldn't have been thought about in the same way before, you are actually now specifically accountable for it. And for me personally, and for what we're trying to achieve, I think that's a huge pro of the process, and something we'll be following very closely. The next topic, I think we've kind of covered quite a lot on already, but I'll just see if anyone has anything else to add. I know a lot of people have mentioned the B Corp community, which I know wasn't something that I personally was particularly aware of, but I've been to some of Seismic's breakfast kind of briefings and seminars, which are fascinating. And the people you get on there, for me, it's like sort of opening my cupboards at home and looking at all the people, the suppliers of everything I have in them that seemingly are all B Corp. But some absolutely amazing names. And as you said, Bernie, a lot of people in the B Corp community seem to like working with other people that are in that community. So that's fantastic. I don't know if there's maybe Amy might have something, I'm not sure, to add on the other kind of opportunities for B Corps. Maybe it's something you've covered already, but in terms of B Corps or B Corp community, if there's anything else you feel needs adding.
Happy to. I think it was, I totally echo what's been said around, first of all, the attraction of clients and customers. B Corps love to buy from other B Corps, and it's kind of the shorthand for, okay, we get each other, we have generally shared values, etc. So I think that's a huge one. But there's so many ways, and I think it's one of those things you really get out what you put in. So there's the Beehive, which is an online platform that you can join and connect with other B Corps around the world. There's events from like just social events where you come together, have a drink, chat, learn, etc., to more structured kind of learning opportunities like webinars and workshops and things. And then there's bigger events, like in September there's a big celebratory B Corp event. It's going to be, I think, 2.5 days of workshops and inspirational talks and having fun. B Corp knows how to throw a good party. There's Toast Ale, who's a great kind of B Corp in the community, have a kind of strapline of, if you want to change the world, you need to throw a better party than those who are destroying it. And I think B Corp really lives up to that. So yeah, basically there's lots of fun to be had, and there's also, but lots of collaboration to do. So there's working groups where you can come together either on an industry, like about an industry. So it's like a finance working group, or about an internal department, HR, marketing, etc., or a shared challenge. So plastics and packaging working group, regenerative agriculture, etc. And it's basically people from either different industries or same industries, sometimes even competitors, coming together to say, listen, we're all working towards the same thing. We've all got shared challenges, etc. How can we collaborate and go faster? And one other thing I'll just say, I think there's so many great ways to get involved with the B Corp community once you're in it. Sometimes it can feel a little harder when you're not there yet. And oftentimes when you're not there yet is when you want the community more than ever, because you want to learn from, okay, how did you do this? What are some tips? What advice can I get? And so I would definitely just reach out to other certified B Corps that inspire you or that are in your industry. They're generally very open and happy to share. Also at Seismic, we're running an academy. So this is for kind of organizations who don't necessarily have the need or budget for a lot of, hand holding from a B leader. I'm glad you mentioned B leaders, James, because they're a great resource, and myself and the team at Seismic have actually trained most of the B leaders in the UK and Europe. So they're a great group. But if you want something that's a bit more collaborative, the academy that we're running is a chance to come together with other companies who are also on their journey and kind of get advice from ourselves, but while going through in that kind of cohort approach. So you can work your way through the B impact assessment with our advice, but also by learning together with other peers. So I think we'll share some information afterwards, but if you're interested in that, then we'd love to have you join us.
That would be great. Thank you, Amy. It's really interesting. I didn't know a lot of that myself. I guess the main final point to run through before we move on to some questions, because I can see some questions popping up now, relates to the post-certification process. So once you've actually been through the process, what happens next? I guess that's in terms of, you know, reassessing, reevaluating, and sticking to those kind of core values and things that you've put in place. I know, Victoria, you had some comments on this. It may also be something that Amy has some points to add in terms of the process. But Victoria, did you want to chat a bit about that?
Yeah, happy to, Helen. And yeah, I probably will lean on Amy around the real specifics of sort of the process or that's under renew at the moment. I was on a B Lab webinar a couple of weeks ago, and that was sort of touching on the evolution of the standards that are under review, that are changing, that are being streamlined. So yeah, I'm really intrigued to sort of see, you know, the final cut that comes out of that process and what that looks like and what that means for companies wanting to become B Corp certified for the first time, or companies like ourselves at the right time going through recertification. So yeah, lots of changes going on within B Corp themselves, and really intrigued to see what that looks like. But yeah, I suppose from a capsule perspective, I suppose this point around post-certification probably just pulls me back to this point around this being an ongoing journey, an ongoing learning curve. And I think embracing that is really important. I think I touched on earlier that, you know, it definitely wasn't the finished article, but if I look at where we're at now compared to how we was going into that sort of certification, we know we've come on hugely, and I think that's sort of down to that, you know, commitment right across the business, to sort of keep improving, keep learning, and fill some of the gaps in that maybe, you know, were flagged first time round for us. And I think the pillars help with that. I think that allows sort of real structure to sort of say we might be great over here in this area and doing brilliant things for our staff, and we've got the right policies in place, and, you know, we've got brilliant perks for our team, and we create a great environment. But we might be really light on this side of things. So actually, let's really focus our efforts on improving more around the community elements, or governance, or environment. So every business is so different, and will have you know, ways of demonstrating sort of their worthiness of being a B Corp, more often than not in one area over another. And it's about sort of balancing that out a little bit, I think, and making sure that you're doing a good amount and progressing sort of across the board in all of those areas. I just to try and pull an example or two, I think when we sort of went through sort of certification the first time, we sort of realized that we had not really done enough in assessing and reviewing all of the suppliers that we work with as a business. You know, so we undertook a supplier audit just to make sure that we were really clear of who we were working with and what they were about and their commitments and so on and so forth. You know, and that was, you know, an audit that the sort of team undertook. I suppose what we've done since then is put a real process in place to sort of to back that up, where we're going out to suppliers to sort of ask them, you know, a series of questions around how they're running their business and what their commitment is, you know, whether they're a B Corp or not, so that we can make a really informed decision about, you know, whether we want to work with them as a business, or whether we can support them on their own journeys as well. So yeah, it's a bit like new starters. You know, we brought new starters in and sort of welcomed them with open arms into our business. But again, in the last 12 months, we've made real changes and progress around the onboarding process to make sure that we induct new starters really thoroughly, bring them into sort of our way of thinking and how we approach business and how we want to sort of service our clients. So yeah, I think post-certification, keep learning, keep embracing the journey, because it sort of, there's not an end date on it. It's definitely something that's continuous.
Thank you very much, Victoria. I don't know, before we move on to questions, whether, Amy, you have any information about the actual kind of requirements in terms of, I guess, ongoing assessment and reassessment, etc.
Yes, I mean, it's at present, it's just that after you certify, every 3 years you need to recertify. So it's really key there to just keep your eye on the ball, because I think a lot of times companies, it's been so much effort to certify, and you get that certification and then you go, okay, thank God for that. And then you kind of forget about it for a while. And obviously that's totally not the point of the whole process, and also is logistically challenging when then recertification rolls around. So making sure you kind of just embed it into your practices is super important. But yeah, as Victoria mentioned, there are these new standards coming out, and so they're set to launch in 2025. We're not sure exactly when yet, but I would recommend, if you're thinking of certifying, to ideally try and certify currently on this current version, as the new standards will be a bit harder. The intention isn't to make it harder, it's to make sure that the standards are always meaningful and reflect what is necessary to be a B Corp in this current state that we're in. But that naturally means it does get harder. So better to certify now and get in there. In the new version of the standards, there will be companies will still need to recertify every 3 years, but whereas now all you need to do is maintain 80 points or higher, and it doesn't matter if actually, for example, you could have certified with 100 points and then recertify with 90 points, that's still okay. But going forward, there will be a requirement for continuous improvement, where you're required to kind of identify things that you will improve on, and then when you recertify, kind of show that you have made genuine progress or on those areas, which is great, because I think that's the right thing, but it's just something to bear in mind.
Thank you, Amy. That's really, really helpful. I think, unless anyone has anything specific else to add, we've had quite a few questions, so I might move on to those, because I think they're going to sort of go back and touch on some of the things we've talked about, but perhaps in more detail. I think one that kind of carries on from what you were just talking about, Amy, one of the someone on the call has said that they've been a bit worried about the changes and review that they're making to the process this year, and they're concerned about the amount of work that might be involved in that, and just wondered if anyone had any insight to that. I imagine, Amy, probably you're maybe best placed to answer that one.
So am I.
Oh, okay, go for it then.
No, it's it is. It's I think, again, this is, Amy, this is something that you've already alluded to, that the journey doesn't stop at certification. Amy, I was actually going to ask you about impact reporting, because I think impact reporting is an iterative part of the 3-year cycle, that an impact report is meant to be submitted every year before you then go through the recertification loop at the end of that 3-year cycle. Is that right?
Yeah, in the Articles of Association commitment, you also commit to creating and sharing an annual impact report. Yeah. It's great for transparency purposes, Yeah, hold yourself to account. I think if there's one thing that will encourage continuous improvement, it's realizing that you have to tell everybody about what you've done or haven't done. Yeah.
And Amy, going back a bit to that question, the initial question then, in terms of the changes that are coming, obviously people are worried about that being more work. I think from the question that was asked, this is probably from someone who already has certification, is worried what the changes might mean for them.
Yeah, so for companies who are already certified, and this is also part of why I would encourage, if you're thinking of certifying, to do it now before the new standard comes in. You have a grace period. So the exact timelines haven't been released by BLab yet. So this is a generalization and subject to change, but how it's worked with previous evolutions of the standards is that, and what they've confirmed for this one is that you will have one recertification round on the current version of the assessment. And that's bearing in mind that, this is a bit of a step up in the new standard that's coming out. And they want to make sure that existing B Corps have enough time to, to work up towards that rather than it being a big, shift. So you've got a recertification round on the current version, which should be a bit of a comfort. But what I would recommend is still identifying, looking at the new standards and doing a kind of a gap analysis and starting to build in a plan for how you will work towards those new standards when you do need to recertify after your next certification. But yeah, there's a kind of a grace period. Also, usually what happens is if you are about to certify on the current standards, when the new standards come in, usually you have a grace period there, so that you're not just automatically chucked out of the old one and into the new one. That won't happen. You'll be able to kind of wrap up on the version that you're on if you're within a reasonable period of time. Yeah. But I do recommend still bearing in mind, like I said, looking to what the new standards are saying. We have a blog that we're happy to, we can share the link afterwards as well, that kind of helps to break it down. There's this kind of 10 impact area focuses, because it's open for consultation at the moment, actually. So BLab have an open consultation on the new standards, but it's quite a lot to digest. So if you have the time, and the resource, I definitely recommend engaging with that consultation period, because it's really important that they get feedback from companies so that they're able to kind of build in that real marketplace feedback. But if you don't have necessarily the time to work through a really big assessment and questionnaire, feel free to read our blog as well.
Thank you, Amy. A few other questions. There's quite a few questions, which probably everyone can chip in very quickly on, around the typical time it takes for someone to achieve B Corp status once they've, I guess, started the process. I mean, I know, Amy, you alluded to the fact that quite a few people start and go into the process and don't achieve it first time. So I don't know whether it's worth the panelists just sharing kind of how long their process took as an indication. Maybe.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in briefly. There was some activity before I arrived at Enso. My CEO had applied. I think he was in a holding pattern for about a year, but by the time I joined, he threw me the deck and said, "Right, over to you." So in all honesty, that took about 10 months for me to get my head around the BIA. I think the BIA was probably presented with about 6 or 7 months prior to the deadline. And as I said, I leaned on a B leader a lot, working up to the initial interview at submission time, which I think fell at about late January 2022. And I think the verification, the toing and froing of second order questions probably took another month or so, maybe 6 weeks. So it was about 10 months. It was quite long. But what it did do is it really made me unearth bits of the business that I wouldn't have had a look at. And I think that was hugely beneficial.
I think from my perspective, timing very much depends on the business in question. We hear people talk about 9 months, and that's pretty quick, I would say, for this kind of process. But equally, I think we did, one of the other panelists mentioned sort of 18 months from start to finish, and anywhere in between. We're a service business. We don't make anything tangible, And I think we needed to sort of approach the process with sort of those eyes, and think about how, as a service business, we could best demonstrate, or what were the sort of viable measures that we could use to sort of contribute towards a score, or contribute towards sort of certification. So yeah, I think if you're a service business, it's maybe a slightly different approach and sort of question set, not a different set of questions, but you approach the question slightly differently if you're a service business than you would do if you was sort of making sort of a product. So that's probably worth bearing in mind. But yeah, I think 9 months to 18 months and anywhere in between is probably fair.
It also, just to jump in, it actually is a slightly different set of questions. I meant to say that before. So the assessment's tailored to companies based on their size and sector. So as a service-based company, you guys will see different questions than, say, James, as a product-based company.
Yeah, would you say that's easier, Amy?
Well, the intention is for it to be equally as challenging, but just in a relative way. But I think there's always service companies think it's harder for them, and product-based companies thinks it's harder for them. I'll let you guys battle that out and decide.
We'll take into account.
Amy, there was another question, and that just slightly links to what you were just saying about the different sizes of companies. One of our guests was asking whether there's in any way like a minimum size of kind of company or business that it makes sense to put through this process. I guess coming from the fact that we've got a lot of startups, scale-ups, SMEs that we act for. I don't know in your experience whether there is a minimum size that it makes sense for, whether the questions are different, anything like that.
Yeah, good question. So from a requirement point of view, there's no minimum size. The only minimum is you have to be at least 1 year old. So because you have to have a full year of performance to be able to report on. But apart from that, yeah, there's a 0 worker track, because it's tailored not only on the sector piece, but on size by number of employees. So if you are, a 1-person organization, then you would be on the 0 employee track, and the workers section would disappear, because obviously you wouldn't mark yourself on how you treat yourself. And then the other sections would be kind of more heavily weighted. So it's doable to do it as a, very small organization. And I would still encourage it. I think it does become slightly harder, just because there's some things that aren't as relevant. Like, as a relatively young or small organization, you probably won't have, a full all singing, all dancing board with, non-executive directors and this and that. So there's some things that are going to feel maybe a little less relevant. But what I would say is start using the assessment anyway, and set yourself these goals, and don't be in too much of a hurry to get certification, but set yourself these milestones and say, okay, well, we don't need, for example, a board now, but maybe by our whatever 2nd, 3rd birthday, we're going to ensure that we build that into the business. So you're kind of using it as a bit of a roadmap to build these things in that are right when you are the right size for them to be relevant to you.
Thanks, Amy. That's really helpful. I'm sorry to say we're up to our hour now. I think we could go on, and I'm conscious we've got quite a few more questions that haven't been picked up, but I'm hoping quite a few of those were asked as we went along, and I'm hoping we've covered a lot of those. Obviously, if anyone has any questions that they still want answering, we can make sure everyone's got the panelists' details, so do kind of contact them with any specific questions. I know Igniton and also Seismic run a series of events, webinars and that kind of thing, so do look out for those on LinkedIn and follow, because I think they'll also give a lot more information on this and other topics. And really, finally, just to say thank you for coming, and thank you so much for our excellent panel. You've been fantastic, and I know I've learnt a lot from today. So yeah, thank you so much for joining us. I hope it's been helpful, and see you next time.
Guys, thank you very much for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Helen.
Bye.